Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're looking at a crisis that's, well, it's less about physics and much more about the flaws in human nature. The starting point is something we've touched on before. This massive, completely unsolicited data dump. 3 petabytes of tech knowledge.
Warp drive technology, or WDT.
Exactly, WDT. And it all came from that celestial object, 3i Atlas.
And this knowledge, even just as theory, immediately becomes what the sources call the ultimate strategic prize. But that prize came with a huge cost. The international group, the consortium that was supposed to be analyzing the data, they didn't just disagree. They fell into, and I'm quoting here, psychological hostility and infighting.
Right. It deteriorated almost instantly, so fast that the benefactor, the industrialist who funded the whole EOS investigation, he witnessed what he called a total failure of the consortium. And that led him to this really devastating conclusion. Humanity was not worthy, as yet, to handle that kind of power, interstellar power.
And that specific judgment, that's the heart of our deep dives today. We're really focusing on let's say, the extreme rationale behind his choice to intervene. Preemptively and, all by himself.
Just shut it all down.
To shut it all down before anyone could use the tech. And this act, this termination, it leads directly to the creation of the Code of Caution, the COC.
So our mission here is to really dissect that paradox. How could the benefactor justify using his own absolute private power to enforce a code that is all about collective restraint and total transparency? We really need to get into the crisis that made him believe that acting alone was the only moral option left.
Exactly. So let's start with the stakes. The existential threat. Why did WDT set off such an extreme reaction? It wasn't just about faster ships. It was about creating an immediate global strategic imbalance. The benefactor saw that just the existence of this data, if it wasn't managed, would kick off a power consolidation war.
Or what the sources call catastrophic fragmentation.
Yes, everyone scrambling for control. The real danger wasn't technical failure. It was political. It was human failure.
And this wasn't his first time at the rodeo, so to speak. He'd dealt with global ethical problems before. The sources give us some really crucial context on his history, which made this WDT crisis his ultimate moral test.
Yes, and this is a critical detail. He confesses to the author that he was the ghost who leaked the scrolls into government servers years before. So he was already wrestling with his own history of flawed, unsanctioned meddling.
So he had a personal stake in getting this right.
An enormous one. Now he's faced with tech that's exponentially more dangerous than the scrolls. He felt personally responsible for the outcome.
So when the consortium just implodes, why not take a step back, convene a public committee, try a democratic approach? Why did he have to act completely alone in total secret?
Because the crisis, as he saw it, just didn't allow for that. The internal rot was too advanced, too fast. The consortium was supposed to be the check on ambition, but it had just become 2 warring factions.
One side wanting to destroy it, the other seeing it as a life raft.
Precisely. So the threat was immediate, existential. It required speed and it required secrecy.
He didn't even bring in his own executive staff.
No, he dismissed them. He relied solely on the author, who acted as a moral sounding board, just helping him sharpen his resolve, clarify the ethics. For the benefactor, the core principle was already forming in his mind what would become the code's preamble, that any technology this powerful, this transformative, has to be subject to collective restraint, not unilateral ambition.
The lack of restraint within that group proved the whole system was broken. It needed an external circuit breaker.
That's the key insight. You put a weapon of ambition, and we'll define that in a second, in a small, unaccountable group. And it didn't just strain their ethics, it warped their ability to be rational. The time for talking was just over. It was time for an emergency termination.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at the actions he took, this wasn't just, cutting the funding. This was a terrifyingly final preemptive strike. What did that terrible resolve actually look like?
It was a 3-part physical mandate, and it instantly changed the course of human history. We should probably pause and just absorb the weight of each of these actions.
Okay, let's start with the data itself, the target.
Right. First act, the eradication of the threat. He ordered all 3 petabytes of the WDT data to be completely erased from EOS, the quantum AI system where it was being housed. Just think about the sheer audacity of that. Erasing knowledge that could have taken us to the stars. It's like an intellectual murder done to prevent a global war.
And second, he went after the institution that held the power.
Precisely. That was the dissolution of authority. The consortium was immediately and permanently disbanded. He had watched this group become those two warring camps we mentioned.
The advocates of restraint versus the proponents of action?
Yes. And he concluded that the rot was human. It was just ambition and fear. So the only fix was to terminate the entire project and the structure around it. He didn't try to fix it. He just vaporized it.
And then there was the hardware, the source of it all, the obelisk.
The obelisk, the physical object from 3i Atlas, was put in permanent secure stasis. Then it was moved to a deep ocean trench.
Out of reach.
Completely out of reach. Completely out of reach, ensuring that even the source material was gone. The closure was absolute, non-negotiable.
So those three actions, eradication, dissolution, containment, they perfectly set up what he later published in the code, specifically Article 1, the principle of preemptive humility. That article defines exactly what he just shut down, a weapon of ambition.
And that definition is so important. A weapon of ambition is basically any tech project that can push a civilization past the Kardashev Type 1 power threshold, or obviously achieve interstellar travel. WDT fell right into that category.
And for anyone listening who might not be familiar, what does that Type 1 threshold actually represent?
It's a measure of a civilization's power. So a Type 1 civilization can harness all the energy available on its home planet. WDT, by promising interstellar flight, just blows past that threshold in a completely uncontrolled. So the code mandates that any research into these kinds of technologies has to be restricted to theoretical modeling only. The benefactor's eradication order was just him enforcing that rule immediately and with finality.
So after this huge, irreversible act, the benefactor sits down with the author and formalizes his thinking into the Code of Caution. Why was it so important that it was drafted and published after he'd already acted?
I think it really shows his intent. He knew the immediate crisis needed a destructive act, but the long-term goal needed constructive wisdom. The Code of Caution became that human-created framework for absolute self-restraint. He told the author to publish it, and he stressed not the technology, but the wisdom.
So the code itself isn't a law.
No, it's a template and an invitation. It's not enforced by his power. It's meant to build collective humility into how we respond to these things in the future.
And the goals of the code, they're radical. It's not just asking for restraint. It mandates a level of transparency and maturity that's, well, it's the opposite of how competitive.
I mean, take Article 3, the prohibition of secret power. It demands that no research like this can be done in secret. Because, and this is a powerful line, civilizational fracture begins with hidden knowledge.
Which is exactly what he saw happen in the consortium.
Exactly. Secrecy creates distrust, fear, the very divisions that made the group collapse.
Right.
And then you have Article 4, the burden of demonstrated readiness. This says that anyone proposing this kind of project has to prove not just that the tech works, but that we as a species are ready for it. Our institutions, our culture.
Technical success is not enough.
Not even close. You have to prove you are worthy of the power.
And maybe the most profound one is the article about future generations. The intergenerational veto.
That's Article 6. It's just a profound safeguard against doing irreversible harm. The code insists that no single generation can irrevocably bind its successors to a technology.
Any change has to be reversible.
Reversible within the lifespan of those who did not consent to them.
So can you give us a quick example of what that would prevent?
Sure. Think of permanent genetic alterations to the human species, or self-replicating nanobots you can't shut down. Article 6 says you just can't deploy those. The next generation has to have the absolute right to undo your choices. It preserves human autonomy across time.
Which brings us right back to the central dilemma, the paradox we started with. You have a code built on transparency, on collective consent, but it was born from a solitary, secret, unilateral act of destruction? How on earth did the benefactor justify that contradiction?
And this is where we really have to dig into the nuance of the sources. He was incredibly deliberate about this. He called his actions pre-code emergency actions. He saw his own order to dissolve the consortium and erase the data as mandated compliance with Article 2, the mandate of unified consent.
That sounds like an incredible piece of philosophical jujitsu. How can acting alone possibly comply with a mandate for unified consent?
He interpreted it by negation. Article 2 prohibits any single entity, a nation, a company, whatever, from unilaterally developing or concealing a weapon of ambition. The benefactor's argument was that the consortium, because it had fractured so badly, had ceased to be a unified collective body. It had become a single, immature, and therefore dangerous entity acting in its own self-interest.
So he redefined the entire group, despite all its members, as functionally being a single entity.
Precisely. So by dissolving that entity and erasing the data, he made sure that no single unchecked power could keep control and threaten the world.
So by acting unilaterally.
He enforced the core principle that no one else could act unilaterally with that power. He was enforcing collective restraint through an act of, well, supreme solitary force.
That's a staggering justification. He was willing to sacrifice his own ethical purity in the moment to enforce a long-term structural rule. He became the exception that proves the rule.
He had to pull the emergency brake that no one else could reach. And the sources are clear. He knew the irony. His preemptive strike was meant to support the code's goal to preserve genuine human autonomy. It was an attempt to create a world where, hopefully, those kinds of emergency measures would never be needed again.
He had all this personal power and wealth, and he used it not to build something, but to destroy arguably the greatest discovery in history, all for moral stability. That's a kind of discipline we just don't see.
It's a different definition of power, isn't it? Power defined by what you choose not to do. He saw the code not as a way to justify what he did, but as a way to articulate the conditions, the wisdom, the transparency that were so clearly missing when he had to act.
So what does this all mean? What does this deep dive into his rationale mean for us today when we're facing our own transformative tech like AI?
I think the key takeaway is the severity of his logic. He believed that acting unilaterally to enforce restraint was the only path to avoid the greater failure of war and societal collapse. He used that one act of termination to plant the seeds of an ethical framework, the code of caution, that would ironically forbid anyone else from ever doing what he did.
He traded one moral breach for the hope of preventing a civilizational one.
That's the exchange. And the benefactor knew that the real power of the code, if it has any, lies not in compliance, but in the debates it might provoke. Which leaves us with the question: if our own technology outpaces our collective wisdom, can a private act of termination ever successfully spark a necessary public debate? We're left wondering if restraint and moral discipline can be contagious too. Or if that old human pattern, build first, ask questions later, is just inevitable. He wagered that his radical act could break that cycle, but that's a very difficult wager to win.